Borders.
Hi, I'm Karen and I created this video for Georgia College and State University. In this video we'll be discussing borders. We'll look at an example where I show you several different kinds of borders. We'll discuss the border factory class and creating border objects. Enjoy!
You can place a border around a component or group of components in a panel. Using borders can help give your windows a more organized look by grouping related components inside borders. A component can appear with several different styles of borders around it. A border object specifies the details of a border. Use the Border Factory class to create border objects instead of creating border objects by yourself. To use the Border Factory class, import javax.swing.star. The Border Factory class has methods that return various borders. Borders produced by the Border Factory class include compound borders, empty borders, etched borders, line borders, lowered bevel borders, matte borders, raised bevel borders, and titled borders. You do not need to create an instance of the Border Factory class. Instead, just call its methods with a Border Factory dot preceding it. You can do this because these methods are static methods. For example, you could say Border Factory dot create titled borders and then pass a string title. Let's examine the Border Factory methods more in detail. The create component border creates a border that has two parts, an inside edge and an outside edge. The inside and outside edges can be any of the other borders. Create empty border creates a border that contains only empty space. Create etched border creates a border with a 3D appearance that looks etched into the background. And create line border creates a border that appears as a line. The create lowered bevel border method creates a border that looks like beveled edges. It has a 3D appearance that gives the illusion of being sunken into the background. The create matte border creates a line border that can have edges of different thicknesses. The create raised bevel border creates a border that looks like beveled edges. It has a 3D appearance that gives the illusion of being raised above the background. And the create titled border creates an etched border with a title. So let's look at some sample code where we use borders. So here I've imported javax.swing.star, and also to create border objects you have to import javax.swing.border.star. And then I've imported these to work with the JFrame. I have my public class that extends JFrame and my constructor. The first thing I do in my constructor is I create border objects. And so here's my first border object. I named it red line, and I used the border factory here, border factory dot create line border, and then I set the color to red. So all this information is stored in a border object that I named red line. I do the same thing to create several different kinds of borders for y'all to see. I create a etched border that's raised, and notice in the arguments here I have to say etched border dot raised, and let's scroll over so you can see that etched border dot raised. And then when I can create another etched border, and in the argument it's etched border dot lowered, and these are stored in raised etched and lowered etched borders. I do the same thing with beveled borders. I use the create raised bevel border method, create lowered bevel border method, and store them in border objects. I create an empty border, which should just be empty, nothing around it. And then lastly I create a titled border, and I just use the string title here to show you. The next thing I do isn't something to do with borders. I just made my font size bigger so that you can see it better. And I created a panel, and I set my layout just to make the borders appear pretty for you, and you don't have to worry about what I did here. I just created an empty border around the layout, that way it just spaced out the borders nicely. So the next thing I do, just to show you the different borders, I created a J label, and created a J label for each kind of border. So red label, raised etch label, etc. for each of those border objects that I created up here. You could, in real life, if you wanted to do a J button, and add a label to it, or add a border to it. You can add borders to your panel, as you can see here. We added a border to our panel. But okay, so I created a label and I just gave it each of them an actual label and centered them. So this one's going to say this is the red line border and the raised etched border. And so down here is where I actually set their borders. The red label that I created, I set the border to the red line border object that I created. This is another label that I created, and I set the border to the raised etched border object that I created. And I did this for all of them. Right here you don't have to worry about what I did. I set the font to the font object that I created up top just so that you can see it better at home. And here I called my panel that I've been using, and I added each label. And you can see add red label, add raised etched label. And this right here just puts some spacing in between the labels so that they don't run together on the screen, and you can see the different labels because they're spaced out. And I just added spacing in between all the labels and before and after them just to give it a nice centered look. But you can see that panel.add raised bevel label, panel.add lowered bevel label, all I did was add all the labels. And then lastly I added my panel. So I set my size, set default close operation, set visible, and over here you can see that I have my main method where I make a new border example, which is going to create an instance of this class. So let's run it. And you can see here's my red line border. That's what the raised etched border looks like. The lower etched border, you can see it looks etched in. Raised bevel border almost looks like a button. Lowered bevel border almost looks like a button that was pressed. Empty border here, it doesn't look like there's a border around it, but it takes up space. And the titled border is a line border with a title, and you can actually play with the justifications to put the title in different places. And so that's it for borders.
I hope this video has helped clarify how you can use borders in your own code. Good luck.